Joining me now is Barnaby Joyce, the member for New England. Congratulations on a, thumping win in New England. In return, are you reassured and reinvigorated for your contribution ahead, Barnaby Joyce?
Well, obviously I'm very humbled by the support we got, and it was all around the electorate. Obviously, some of the booths, there was one in the Aboriginal suburb of Coaldale, a 20% swing to us there. So, it just says to me that I've been given a lot of a bigger job to do in representing my electorate, to make sure that I do the very best job I can, and to make sure the people of New England are put first, and I'll be doing my very best endeavours to do that.
You were dumped as the drought envoy in the reshuffle yesterday. Were you phoned at all by the Prime Minister or Deputy Prime Minister to discuss your options in terms of taking a more senior role?
Look, no, I wasn't, but I'm not going to sort of sit here and sook about it. The thing that I think is important is, if you get a bit of a heads up, you have staff, and you don't want your staff to find out from Twitter that I have two good staff, and I want to make sure I do the very best job I can for them, to make sure that they have a job somewhere else or get absorbed somewhere else. They're staff who are placed out in the country, so you want to make sure that you can do what you can to help them. But the drought certainly has not finished. I think that's an incredibly important point to make sure that we get in the national narrative. And places such as here and the New England is absolutely savage. I went through a place just yesterday with watching the cattle go through the mud to get to water, and that always ends in tears. There's places around here that look like Palestine. The drought is roaring ahead, and as you go into winter, the metabolic requirement of the stock increases with the temperature decreasing, and of course that exacerbates any of the effects. And so many people have burnt up their resources last year and the last couple of years because of the drought, and this year they're going to be truly under the pump.
So you felt you still had some more work to do in that role as drought envoy? There was more work to be done?
Well, I think it's not so much me, but certainly the government has got a lot more to do, and this one will test it, because as the media spotlight fades, people go on to the next shiny new thing. The drought still remains, and there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done, and there has to be decisive. We have areas now, even Sydney now is going to water restrictions. The city of Sydney is going to water restrictions. We must start building some water infrastructure. We have critical water infrastructure issues right across our nation now, and if we can't just ignore this, there's one thing you can do in droughts, and that's build water infrastructure. But whilst we're doing that, we have to keep the commerce of these towns going, and it's going to need. It can't be something you just talk about. The role of the drought envoy never had a checkbook. It was merely advice, and that's what you were supposed to do. But if we take our focus off this, people will feel truly let down, and we can't do that. And we'll pay a price, and the price will be that people don't. Will say you dropped us off when we're at our greatest need.
Well, you might not have the formal title, but by the sounds of it, Barnaby Joyce, you're going to continue this very strong advocacy on that matter.
Well, the issue is in my electorate. It's probably its epicentre. So, I went from Bundarra through to Barraba the other day, and it's incredible. You can't tell the difference between the road and the paddock. And the same thing is when I went out to just a couple of days ago to Wallamumbi. I've never seen the country in that poor a condition. Now, there are certain areas right out in the far west that have had some rain, and certainly certain areas up in Queensland around Marra that's had some rain. But it is ferment. So there are areas that have had some relief, but then there always are the areas that haven't. And now we're in the driest time of the season for them, and they're literally running out of water. You can feed stock if they run out of feed, but if they run out of water, you sort of uke.
Yeah, and you said you don't want to talk about yourself and have a whinge, but as a former Deputy Prime Minister, do you think you would have expected a phone call from someone, wouldn't you, to have a chat?
Yep, I would have, but I didn't, and that's life. And you move on. I think there are bigger things out there now to be dealt with, and maybe that's something to look into their process in the future. As I said, the main issue there, look, that is a role that a leader has. They can make that call, but I think it is incumbent upon them to relay that in person to people, not to have them find out via Twitter. But and why it's important is because you've got staff, and you've got to ring people up. And the first call I made when I did find out was to my staff and to say, look, I'm really sorry about that. I'm going to try and find you a job. You're a good staff member. I'm sure there's work out there. I'll try and put a good word in for you in the respective places.
Yeah. And finally, I know that you've made some very strong comments in terms of the issue of climate change and the government's handling of that vis-a-vis the Labor Party. Do you think that Scott Morrison's got the right balance in terms of his reshuffle in terms of that issue as well?
Well, I think you should focus first and foremost on poor people who can't afford their power. In the person who's a pensioner, whose house you go into, and they can only run a fridge because they can't afford to run any other electric appliance. That is no electric heater, no electric stove. That is something that is intolerable in Australia. The fact that we have houses now where they just have no electricity, so the kids come home from school, there is not an electric heater, there is not an electric stove, there is not a toaster, because there is no power. I mean, we have to recognise that for me, is the greatest moral problem of our time in Australia, that we have now created a nation with the dearest power prices in the world, for which people are truly suffering. We've taken them back a century and a half to a time of candles because of our policies. Now, we've got to recognise that, and we've got to be able to break this zeitgeist down. And when we say we're going to build a coal-fired power station, get out there and do it. And when you say that you have a policy that's going to bring about the divestiture of the major power companies so that they don't act in a moral and responsible way and keep on exploiting the customer, that you will break them in two. Now, you said you're going to do it. Get out there and do it. I think that is the greatest imperative for us now, because although the climate is changing, there is no policy that Canberra can come forward with which will change the climate back. But by God, you can make people poorer, you can make them more miserable, and you have no right to do that. So you must go forward noting that the person at the top of your list is the one you least hear, is the poorer person in the poorer house who can't afford their power.
And my last question, as a backbencher, you're free to speak and do as you wish. You'll be putting the heat on the government where you see fit?
I think that any person in any role in government has to do their role to the best ability. I'm not going to be something that, I will work to the government's purposes, but when someone needs to hear or have their voice heard in government, I'll definitely do that. And I'm doing it right now in regards to power prices. I don't think that is something that at odds with the government, that it's not trying to tear anybody down, but it's certainly speaking up for people who can't be heard, and I'll definitely be doing that.
Barnaby Joyce, I appreciate your time as always. Thanks.
You're welcome, Kieran.